Rick Olson, and thanks for watching Who Cares TV. This show is called the UpLink, and we do a lot of different types of things on the show, try to do some light stuff, and today we're going to be doing some heavier stuff. In studio with me is Jeff Goebel.
Hello.
How you doing, Jeff?
I'm doing great, thank you.
Now, you've got a kind of a wide background of things that you kind of combine. In today's show, we're going to kind of focus on finding some fresh solutions in a landscape of stagnant thinking. Yeah. And Jeff does a lot of things with ecology, with climate, and that sort of thing. And even if ranching and those sorts of things aren't what you're talking about, try to look through and see Jeff's strategies for bringing fresh thinking to some of the problems that people have. Now, you were working out at Montana?
Right. It was about 2 summers ago. I was looking at working with a community of about 150 ranchers and looking at how to do something different with them. They were really frustrated financially, and the big thing for them was that they weren't bringing the next generation, back to the farm.
So they were aging. Yes. And the kids were leaving and not coming back, and they were getting poorer while they were doing this.
That's right, yeah. The average age is over 60 for the farmer now in that area and pretty much around the country. And, there's a real crisis really about the younger generation, the 40, 50-year-olds, the 30-year-olds, the 20-year-olds. So, so we were working with how to change that.
And so you got a group of them together and did what?
What we did is, a little bit on the backside of I was working with a friend of mine who's done some pretty amazing work with generating wealth and improving the landscape of his ranches that he's worked with over the years. And we were talking about how, he goes and gives a lot of presentations, but it doesn't stick. It doesn't change. They really like what he has to say, but it doesn't change. So I said, well, I'd be willing to go help work with one of those presentations that you're working with, do it a little differently and see if we get a different response. And so he was very intrigued by that. So he had an opportunity where for the third time he was being invited to come back to this community in Montana to talk again about what he had talked about before, and nothing was happening. So he said, well, let's try it up there. So we met up there about 2 summers ago, and we had about 150 ranchers that came to the presentation. And what I did first is I split them up into very diverse groups of families and neighbors and that sort of thing. So it wasn't, there's a lot of time there's groupthink, and you kind of want to be by who you're comfortable with or who you know, which is your family or friends or things. And so so that's how they sat down together, and then we just counted off and got everybody mixed up into different groups. And then I also had some of the government people from the community also be part of those different groups, so that there was the opportunity to learn from new people instead of what you normally think. And then what I did, to build the relationship part was to do a little bit of dialogue and an introductory piece about expectations for the meeting and how they feel and what they want to see for that day. Then what Greg and I developed for the day was that Greg would give about 30-minute presentation of a topic, and then take a break, and then I would let the group process what they just heard him say. So rather than just have Greg give a 2-hour presentation straight, I let him talk about 30 minutes, which is about what the seat of the pants and the mind can kind of absorb, and then let them process what they were hearing. And then we go to the next 30-minute segment, and then same thing.
So, and what did you find out? I mean, were they able to kind of parrot back what they had heard, or were they, so they got the facts and figures, but?
Yeah, so Greg first talked about, a little bit about Greg's background is that his master's degree several years ago was looking at the typical budget of ranching in the northwest part of the United States, the 6 northern states. And he found a pattern of how people, how they made money and then how they spent it, and so what their net bottom lines were. And then, so what he was going to do was say, okay, at the time the price was really good in ranching, and so it was $2 a pound. So he said, okay, well, let's take $2 a pound and is this what your typical budget looks like in this area? And they said yes, and they plugged in the number of animals that they would normally have on their ranches in that area. And they calculated it through, and he said, okay, well, then your bottom line is going to be about $45,000 profit. And they said, well, yeah, that's right. That's it. And that's in a very good price.
And that's profit for the ranch. That's not
profit for the ranch. Yeah,
right.
That's the bottom line. It's not individuals.
Not per person, not per head.
Yeah, that's for the whole enchilada. And so, and then the question, could you bring your kids home for that $45,000 a year profit? And they said, well, they probably could. That was probably enough to get their interest. And so then I had them process, how did you feel about what Greg said, and what did you learn from it that will help you be successful? And of course it was, that's what we normally do. That's what we're faced with. That's our typical kind of scenario that we work with. So they had agreement with what he shared. And then the next thing that he said that Greg, for the next 30-minute segment, was to, he said, okay, well, let's take a 10% reduction in price, which is still a good price, $1.80 a pound. And he said, let's run those numbers through the same formula and see what the bottom line is. Well, they did, and the bottom line was $13,000 profit. Still a good price.
And it's only 20 cents difference.
Yeah, that's all. And then he said, could you bring your kids home for $13,000 profit?
No way.
No way. And so again, we had them process that. How'd you feel about what Greg said, and what did you learn from it that helped you be successful? And of course, they were shocked, and not surprised, but shocked. And then that was still on the good side of the price, versus how low it can get. And it's like, man, this is not really good. It's they started seeing the seriousness of the situation, and what they were, and the hopelessness about it. It's like, well, this is what we got to deal with. So then the next segment Greg did, he said, well, let's still use the lower price, $1.80 a pound, but let's look at your costs. And he says, I know what your costs are and stuff typically in this area. And he said, what if we take your biggest cost item and we do something different, think differently about that thing? And so he said, your biggest cost item for raising cattle is your calves in the wintertime, and that's about half your cost of production. So he said,
so feeding and taking care of the calves through the wintertime was half of
the overall cost of raising the calf.
Okay.
So that's the bulk of where they spend their money, and it gives them the outcomes that they get. So they looked at that and they said, okay. Greg said, what if you cut that biggest cost item in half? So you cut that much out of your budget. And then Greg went on to give several examples of what he's done over the years to do that. He's done even greater than that. He's really cut it down, but and quite successfully. But it's different what he was suggesting, and different than what's being taught, as the normal way of doing things. And so, when he ran through the lower price, $1.80 a pound. And with these changes, just cutting half the cost of production off, or a quarter of the cost, cutting the big cost item in half, the bottom line was now $154,000 profit versus $13,000.
Oh, that's a huge difference.
Yeah, it was. You could kind of see some people kind of sit up in the audience at that point,
right?
And of course, there's a lot of disbelief,
Sure.
And so we had them process that. Oh, and then he asked, of course, he said, could you bring your kids home for the $150,000 profit? They said, we could retire and have a great time with that.
We'll be back in just a second with more of Jeff's story here on the UpLink.